With the reviews for Tales of Arise and Scarlet Nexus finally up on the channel, I think it would be fun to discuss which would be the better game if you could only pick one. Both games have been surprise hits for developer-publisher Bandai Namco, with Tales of Arise representing a new chapter in the long-running franchise, and Scarlet Nexus being a breakout new IP. There's even crossover DLC for each title, highlighting Bandai's confidence in each game. I'll assess each game's content, story, and gameplay in a head-to-head fashion. While I aim to be objective, you should understand that this is nothing more than one random stranger's opinion. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's get into it. First, let's discuss which games offer you the most bang for your buck. As you'd expect of a JRPG, Arise is a lengthy experience, taking upwards of 30 to 40 hours to complete the main story. That number nearly doubles if you want to focus on side content. Side content includes quests, activities, and in-game dungeons that provide XP, new skills, and cosmetics. Despite how bland many of these side quests can be, you'll usually get unique dialogue that provides more context into character backgrounds and motivations. It's mostly flavor text, but enriches an already likable cast. However, there is a difference between an experience that feels sufficiently lengthy and one that feels protracted, and Arise is the latter. The back half of the game drags on far longer than it needs to, and I wouldn't be surprised if most people who get this game move on to another title before they finish. Scarlet Nexus, on the other hand, offers two story campaigns that each take around 30 hours to complete. There are side quests, but frankly they're terrible and never amounted to anything more than killing enemies for resources. The most engaging extra content in Scarlet Nexus is instead these standby phases where you interact with your party members. You're heavily incentivized to do this, as the closer you get to your party members, the more options you have in combat. The only downside is engaging with these characters feels like a chore, as these are some of the blandest characters I've engaged with in recent memory. Scarlet Nexus also feels a bit longer than it should, but not to the extent of Tales of Arise, where I wouldn't have finished the game were it not for review. Both games offer substantial DLC, with Tales of Arise mainly focused on cosmetics, but offering one arena quest involving characters from Sword Art Online. Scarlet Nexus received several free updates that added in-game combat challenges and expansive options for gameplay refinement. Scarlet Nexus does offer one substantial paid DLC that is worth mentioning. It is an expansion to the main story that fleshes out the motivations of the main villain. However, given how hard it is to complete, you likely will not be able to finish it unless you reach level 99 with your character. The DLC for both titles feels entirely complementary, meaning that both games offer complete experiences right out of the box. These factors make it hard to determine which games offer the better content package overall, as both offer plenty of stuff to do, but given their strung out runtimes, a lot of it feels like how Bilbo described living after he had the One Ring.
Like butter scraped over too much bread.
A lot of it simply isn't that engaging over 30 or so hours. Nevertheless, despite its length, Tales of Arise offers enough variety in its content offerings that you're likely to find at least something you enjoy, whether it's monster slaying, fishing, arena fighting, or collecting owls for cosmetics. Whereas with Scarlet Nexus, if you don't fall in love with the combat, you simply won't like the game that much. Now, attempting to discern whether Tales of Arise or Scarlet Nexus tells a better story is like trying to pick between eating at Shoney's or Denny's. Both will waste your time, and neither will be all that enticing. That's not entirely fair though, as Tales of Arise actually has a pretty good story for roughly 3/4 of the game. It's an intriguing tale about a slave having to work with members of the oppressor race to liberate his people. However, the game is as much an intriguing tale of love, revenge, and learning to accept others' perspectives as it is about the basic plot about ending the enslavement of an entire people. Yet at a certain point, the game stops caring entirely about telling you stories about its characters and starts to tell you stories about the world they inhabit, which unfortunately isn't all that interesting. The more the game tells you about what's happening in its lore, the more I just wanted to yell stop. I felt like it completely nosedives at the end and actually undermines a lot of the messaging and themes that came before. It's a tragedy, honestly, because it's an unforced error. The game has a natural conclusion and then just decides to go on for 20 more hours. Scarlet Nexus suffers from the inverse of this problem. Very interesting lore and world, but bland characters. I can tell you an interesting anecdote about every main character in Tales of Arise, but when it comes to Scarlet Nexus, it's like...
Wait, who are you again?
To be fair, Scarlet Nexus has a substantially larger cast than Tales of Arise, so it is plausible that one could simply be overwhelmed by the size of its cast. However, I don't believe this is the case. I remember all of their names and can tell you their powers and what role they play in the story, but when it comes to their backstories and motivations, I just go...
Girl, please stop talking.
It's a shame because the background lore is actually very interesting. At some point in the future, a hormone is discovered that grants human beings psionic abilities like psychokinesis or teleportation. However, at the same time, humanity comes under attack by these monstrous brain-eating creatures known as Others. You play as one of two new recruits in an elite military outfit known as OSF, a group of psionics who are the only ones capable of taking down the Others. Throughout the course of the narrative, you will work to find out the truth behind the Others as well as the world you inhabit. It sounds very interesting, but the characters somehow take an interesting premise and turns it into a slog. The one redeeming element to Scarlet Nexus' story is the DLC I mentioned earlier, which actually has the best writing the game has to offer. But unfortunately, you're unlikely to experience all of it unless you're willing to play 60 plus hours to be high enough level to reach the ending. Combat is where both Tales of Arise and Scarlet Nexus shine the brightest. Scarlet Nexus is essentially an action game with JRPG elements, whereas Tales of Arise is a JRPG with action elements. This makes judging them in an unbiased fashion difficult, because if you love character action games like Devil May Cry, you're more likely to enjoy Scarlet Nexus. On the other hand, if you prefer flashy experiences like Ultimate Ninja Storm, you'll probably prefer Tales of Arise. Therefore, it's best to judge them on how well they accomplish what they set out to do. Tales of Arise is first and foremost an accessible combat experience, relying on one primary attack button and an easy to understand combo system that will have you feeling comfortable very early on into the experience. As the game progresses, more mechanics are gradually introduced both inside and outside of battle that reveal the depth of the combat system. This includes multiple characters with distinct movesets and expansive skill trees, as well as accessories whose impact on your character's stats could completely revolutionize how you approach battle. So long as you understand a couple of key mechanics, such as downing enemies and boost attacks, you'll be fine playing with just one character. However, should you wish to, Tales of Arise offers depth in learning each character and being able to switch between them on the fly. I personally never had any interest in reaching this point because I never found the enemies to be fun to fight. If you play on hard, you'll find that tougher enemies can be a slog due to inflated health values and a lack of reactivity to your actions. Nevertheless, the best thing I can say about Tales of Arise's combat is that it never gets old watching the visual flair that went into special attacks, as they are a showcase of the game's stellar art style. Scarlet Nexus' combat requires full engagement every single battle. This is in part due to the basic enemies being able to kill you so long as they're close to your level, but also because there are so many mechanics to keep track of. See, while you have your heavy and special attacks, you also have your psychokinesis attacks that allow you to throw almost anything in your environment at the enemy. Complicating matters even further are two separate devil triggers, and multiple powers you can borrow from your teammates at any given point, some of which can be used simultaneously with the right upgrades. All of these are managed by several different gauges, making strategic resource management a key element of battle. However, most of the combat is dictated by having the twitch reaction skills needed to dodge, slay, and defeat your enemies. It's a lot, but it's not as complicated as it sounds, and like Tales of Arise, the game doles out its mechanics over hours of gameplay, giving you plenty of time to get acclimated to its systems. Between the two, I'd have to give the edge to Scarlet Nexus. Its only real weakness is an anemic perfect dodge. Tales of Arise suffers from that issue and enemies that never feel fun to fight. To be frank, Scarlet Nexus is its combat system. It is a reason to play this game, and while other aspects such as its story suffers, the developers absolutely nailed this aspect of the game. There's a lot more that could be discussed, music and graphics, but frankly this is meant to be a short video, and I think the aspects discussed here can give you enough information to know which game you would like the most. All in all, I'm comfortable saying that Tales of Arise is objectively the better game. It's one of the most refined releases in a long-running franchise. Even if the story falls off a cliff, it's still good for most of its run. And while a lot of the content can't sustain its long runtime, there's enough on offer that you're bound to be drawn in by something. Scarlet Nexus basically lives and dies by its combat, with everything else surrounding the game simply being fine. Nevertheless, even while I think Tales of Arise is the better game, if I personally had to pick one, I'd pick Scarlet Nexus. So when considering this discussion, be sure you're aware of your own biases and preferences as well. Some of my favorite games are those that didn't necessarily receive critical acclaim upon release, and it's better to play a 7 that you love than an 8 that you never finish. That will do it for me. If you like the video, please consider liking and subscribing. And let me know in the comments below which would you pick between Scarlet Nexus and Tales of Arise. Until next time, this has been Harlan Gaming.